there were a lot of ways you could have gone with this film. The engineering aspect, patents, the whole bit. What made you decide to do the character development?
I knew that this was a story of epic proportion. When I broached the idea with Chris, thank God he seemed to see it, and I remember he said to me one day, he said, "And what about that idea you told me about developing the story of the Brooklyn Bridge? Are you still interested in doing that?" And I said, "Yes, please."
What I pitched to him was covering this period of time between the passage of power between father and son, and really focusing on that dynamic.
This is going to be your bridge as well.
This will be the largest engineering project in the history of the world. I built a few tactical bridges during the war. I worked for you at the wire company. Nothing that compares to this. There must be a more qualified candidate.
We found something very, very personal having to do with this idea of Washington inheriting his father's work.
Good afternoon, Washington.
William Kingsley. The coffin's not even in the ground yet.
My thoughts and prayers are with you and yours, Washington. You know how much I admired your father. I wanted you to know that the board was giving serious consideration to having you take the helm. There are those with concerns.
We all cast a crew, everybody. We stayed in the same house together for the 3 days, and we're doing like 16 to 20-hour days. Oh, that's right. And while we were all trying to figure out where people would sleep, there was a lot of air mattresses, a lot of fighting. Not even a lot of fighting. There was no fighting. But Jeff slept in the coffin. I mean, that's not dedication to your art. I don't know what it is.
So my question for the actors is, how did you go through that process, and how did you finally know that, yes, this is who I'm supposed to be?
Okay. Well, for me, I had no idea who Emily Warren Roebling was, and I had no idea what the story was before I went to this audition.
There's one thing that they don't have: your name. All the years spent with him, all the knowledge that has been passed down to you. Perhaps you don't realize how much of him there is in you.
And then I talked to some of my friends about it who were like, do you know that this is like the first female kind of engineer woman that there was in America who had this responsibility? And I was like, no, but now I really want the role.
If they choose me to do this, and by the grace of God I succeed, it will be his bridge, as it should be. If I fail, the blame will be mine, and mine alone.
Then we can't fail.
Her parents both died, and then, John and then Washington were sick around her, and having to take care of them and having to take over this job of continuing to finish the project that John had started, and all that responsibility on her shoulders, and still maintaining, not being acknowledged for it, I think, was what I really connected to, sadly. But yeah, it was just a lot of research and a lot of connecting, and then having a great team, and the producer and director and fellow actors to talk about it with. We spent all those 3 days, the conversation never stopped about these characters and what they went through.
This was the first time I had ever played a real person, which sounds funny, but it's kind of a lot more terrifying, I realized, because you want to do the person's legacy justice and their family's legacy justice. So yeah, there's a lot of research, just obsessively reading books and watching every little YouTube video there is about the Brooklyn Bridge, and just obsessed. It was basically all I thought about for a long time. And part of your question was, how did you know that you arrived at the character? And that's a great question, and it's a really hard thing to totally know. I think for me, I realized when I started really just thinking as Washington and not as myself, that either I'm crazy or I'm probably a character and I'm probably there.
You didn't say this, but we actually had a chance to rehearse this. We never have a chance to rehearse stuff, usually in a film.
I know you don't believe she was with us tonight. I won't begrudge you that. Let's to remember her she was in life, I suppose.
We had a chance to work on this like 2 or 3 times. You guys were kind enough to let us offer input in terms of even thoughts about the scripting, right? They wrote it, but we were able to offer input. But as a result of that process, what Chris and Mark did, they gave us a chance to create some chemistry. So we already knew each other before we started shooting it.
What happened?
His foot got caught between the piling and a boat that was coming in. His toe's been crushed.
Will he be all right?
They put his foot in a cold water bath.
He's telling the doctors what to do, isn't he?
Even when Roebling was here in Saxonburg, he practiced what was called hydropathy. He drank large quantities of water every day. He took cold baths even while he was here. He even had his family take cold baths while he was here, and he got them into the same hydropathy. So that was something he had from here and took with him the rest of his life.
Pour the water in the basin. Thank you, nurse.
They have morphine and opium.
The water will be enough.
What about the pain?
I will manage the pain!
What happened to Washington that Emily had to finish the bridge? Isn't that true? Isn't the way I understand it?
Washington really is the one who really built the bridge. He based it on his father's drawings, but they were very preliminary, and he had to do a lot of his own designs. And one of the things that he's most recognized for is a technology that was very new at the time that came from Europe, which is called a caisson. You basically build a box that you sink under the river, and the workers are there digging out the bottom of the river to sink down 200 feet below the surface of the water. So in order to work in that environment, they had to use pressurized air. After you breathe pressurized air for a long enough period of time, in order to get out of pressurized air, you have to reacclimate yourself. And at that time, they didn't really know that was necessary. So you had these workers that were spending hours, long hours, underneath these caissons in pressurized air, and then they'd come up to the surface. And Washington, who felt, which the film touches on to some extent, pressure to live up to, the reputation of his father, spent an enormous amount of time underneath the river in the caissons, and he suffered what was then called caissons disease, which we call today the bends, which is when you rise up from pressurized air into normal air too fast. So at that point, when Washington was really no longer able to be on site at the bridge, Emily was the person who stepped in and kind of acted as a go-between between Washington and what was happening at the bridge.
I remember the screams. People thrust into the icy waters. It was then that I first saw it.
So what?
Our bridge sunk.